Hello and welcome back to Book Talk with Kara. Today I have a real treat for you. I have three of my writing friends and buddies here. I have Susan Tuttle, Janyre Tromp, and Janine Rosche. And what's really fun is they all have pretty much brand new books. Janyre, hold yours up because mine hasn't arrived yet. I need to check on that. But I guess we're recording this. Janine's just came out today. Janyre's came out last week, and then Susan and I had books come out earlier this spring. And so I thought it would be really fun to just get together and talk a little bit about our books, our genres, how we come up with ideas, all of that. So thanks for making time because y'all are busy with families and writing and life and all that. So thanks for coming and joining me tonight.
Thanks for having us.
All right, so we'll start. Susan, I thought we'd start with yours because the rare jewel of Everleigh, that's how I say it. Is that how you say it? I always wonder, I don't know if anybody else does this when you're reading, where you just kind of come up with how a name's said, and then that's the way it is. So Everleigh Wheaton, this is kind of a caper all over the world kind of book. How did you come up with this?
Well, that's a good question. My brain, no. I started out with just this little idea of, I loved the show Charlie's Angels when I was younger. And I just kept seeing these three girls in this house with somebody talking to them on a telephone. And I was like, what do I do with that? And I also absolutely love history. And about a decade ago, I was in Vienna and I got to tour the palaces there. And I got to learn a lot about the Habsburg family and Habsburg dynasty. And they always stayed with me. And there was this little known, like he said, she said, of what happened to the crown jewels when they left off, they were forced out of Austria. And the biggest piece of the crown jewels was this Florentine diamond. And nobody knows what has happened to it all these years. And their story just intrigued me. And I don't know, as I just started to kind of rabbit trail, like, why would this guy bring these girls together? What is happening here? What would he send them looking for and why? And so they went on this hunt for the Florentine diamond, is the book one, what he sends them for.
And we were talking before we got on about what's coming in book two. And now I'm so excited to go to London and go do some investigating for you.
Please take pictures for me.
Yeah. So Janine, your book, it has a different type of road trip. This one's much more of a road trip versus hopping all over the world. But how did you come up with this one? Because I remember you going and doing your whole Route 66 journey. And I mean, you really immersed yourself in it. But when did that kind of pop up in your mind that the whole idea of the road before us was going to be tracing along Route 66, and then you went and drove it and turned it into this book?
So my dad actually drove his 57 Ford Fairlane convertible across the country via Route 66 in 1961. And he was only 18 years old. And once he got to California, he was cruising Maine with a teddy bear, like a huge oversized teddy bear in the passenger seat, like looking for girls, because that's what 18-year-old boys do, I guess. And he met my mom in California. And so I've always kind of seen that Route 66 has this place in my family's story. And my dad used to kind of wax poetic about his trip down Route 66. So I always knew I would want to take that journey. And once I started writing, I would tell, and these girls can tell you, I would say, one day I'm going to write a Route 66 story. And finally, the time came, and I had a few weeks where I could take off by myself and retrace my dad's journey down towards California. And it was just a lot of my parents' story kind of fed into this story, and it just became very personal to me. But that's where the idea came from.
I love that. And it's so cool how you were able to take that piece of family and weave it into this story. But I'm still picturing an 18-year-old driving across the country in a convertible in 1961. And I'm like, what were his parents thinking? But it was a different time. But that's actually a really good segue to Janyre's book, Wind Calls the Tiger. And yours is, or Darkness Calls the Tiger. And yours is set in war and in Asia, and there's this grit, but the same kind of time period that her dad was driving. So, how did you decide on that? Because you've done kind of the World War II time period, you've done Vietnam. So, what pulled you into this story?
Yep. So this is actually World War II Burma, which is modern day Myanmar. It's wedged between China and India. And my roommate in college was actually from India, and I went home with her into the Himalayan mountains, and I kind of just fell in love with that. From her house, you could see 7 ranges of mountains, and it's just,
Wow.
there's nothing
Wow.
like it in the States. It just kind of is mind blowing.
Yeah.
And so I was looking for something that was set in World War II that was just different. And it's really hard anymore to
Yeah.
find World War II stories that haven't been told before. And so I was talking to my mom, and my mom says, well, this friend of a friend, their parents were in India or something, and they were doing something with the Allies in India. And I said, there was no World War II in India, Mom, because, I'm a smart, historian who apparently knows nothing, because there's an entire theater of World War II that is the China, Burma, India theater. And basically, this theater is what prevented Imperial Japan from taking over all of China and India. And the mountains of Burma are widely acknowledged as the genesis for modern US forces, special forces tactics. So the area and the time frame which I'm writing is where the tactics for the Green Berets came from. So this tiger on the cover is actually my main character, and she sees a lot of things that happen and goes into some revenge, and she actually attaches herself to the units that became the tacticians for US modern special forces.
Wow.
I know.
That
And
But
is
she's not an actual tiger, right?
No.
there's a story there. There's another podcast that you have to go find.
That's so cool.
You need
And
to put in the show notes.
yeah. So, but one of the things too, like your cover, Janyre, is stunning. It is absolutely
One of my favorite covers I've ever
gorgeous.
seen.
I know.
love it.
I mean, every time I see it, it pulls me in. It is just stunning. And then I love the colors and everything of yours, Susan. And this one I think is just perfect, Janine. And then when I got mine for The Vanished, I was like, again, spot on perfect. These designers were killing it. But one of the things that readers often want to know is how much input did you actually have? Because like I just got done turning in one of my least favorite after the synopsis. My least favorite part of writing is those marketing sheets.
Yeah.
Where they're like, now tell us about this and now give us all these things. And I'm like, oh, please don't make me do this again. But it's part of that whole process of what do you think the cover should look like? And what should the back cover copy be? And all these different things. What do you want readers to take away from it? But I still didn't know I was going to get this amazing cover for The Vanished. So how much input did you have? Did anything change? Because sometimes we do go back and say, yeah, can we tweak this? Or what about adding this? Or did your covers just come to you and you were like, oh my golly, this is amazing?
So
Janyre, do you want to go first? Or Susan?
My cover actually came because there's 3 books. They sent me actually all 3 covers to show me how they'd work together.
Oh, how cool.
But those aren't the covers that they are anymore. So they were very similar. And in fact, one might still be floating out there, but my cover was actually originally kind of a golden yellow. And it was slightly different with some smaller details in the corners. The overall font was the same. They changed the silhouette a little bit, but it was yellow because of multiple reasons. One, because it's a cool color, but also it's the color, the Florentine diamond itself is yellow. So it was a really neat tie-in to the book. But and they actually put that cover up there on Amazon and on all the bookseller sites. And that's what I revealed. And then at the very last minute, they changed it to purple. I got an email that was like, hey, by the way, We took they had like the diamonds just kind of small in the corners, like just a nod to them. And they took them out of the corner, put them in the middle of the book and made it purple. Yeah. And so I was like, oh, and they changed her silhouette a little bit too. And I had like no say in any of it. So I did say to them, can we maybe keep it yellow because of the tie into the diamond? But they wanted to go with purple. And I love the color purple too. And I'm like, hey, you've got a marketing team. They know what they're doing. So there.
Yeah. So Janyre, how about yours? Because there's so many elements and things. But at that time, you were also working at Kriegel. So maybe you had a little more input by being like, here, let me show you what I think it should be.
Almost every time they were talking about my book in specific, I was either very quiet or I left the room. So we did try to keep a wall between, so, you know, it kind of balances things out. But some people know and some people don't know. I actually have a marketing background. So those marketing sheets aren't scary for me necessarily.
It's just drudgery. It's
just a lot of drudgery. It is. But I already, because as I'm crafting the book, I actually craft a lot of that copy anyway. Like it's already in existence, because I do a lot of work. I do a lot of work for my target audience who I really want to talk to and who this book is really for as I'm writing the book. So they're super scary for me. And then because I used to sit on all the titling and cover committees, there's like a whole science behind what goes on a cover. And so, and it's very targeted to who your target audience is. So I was like, I don't want people on my cover. And of course they can change that. They can go, too bad, that's what the book needs. But my books aren't romance. And typically, when you see a woman on the cover, it tends more toward romance, which there is romance in all of my books. There's romance threads in all of my books, but there's a lot more.
It's not the leading theme.
It's not the leading. I mean, with darkness calls the tiger. I mean, it's
I am thinking roses and candles. That's definitely what I'm thinking.
But you know, they ask for colors, and red is a very important color in the book. And so, I mean, if you look, it's the kind of Chinese tiger licking the Asian tiger. This is the jungle and the mountainscape. So they had 2 basic covers that they were kind of choosing from. And that's what happens is the designers will bring in a couple of ideas based on what the author sends. And then the cover team picks one. And then they go to the author and say, this is what we chose. This is why. And then you can push back or not. And others don't often get a huge amount of say. We can object if there's something really like horrifically wrong, but this cover, I was like, yes.
Yeah, it was gorgeous and it's perfect because you can look at it and you can see, you know, that it's got the mountain landscape and all of that. And and I've always been like, yeah, hold that card until you've got one that you're like, yeah, no, this just has to change. And I had a similar situation, Susan, where Imperfect Justice had one cover. And I was like, I'll live with it. I don't think it's right, but I'll live with it. And that was the one they put out everywhere. And then the publisher on their own came to the realization, yeah, it's not the right cover. And they changed it. And so sometimes you'll still see the old one. And it's
funny. Yeah, I ran across the yellow one the other day. I'm like, oh, whoa, that site hasn't been
that's still out there. And so it's just funny sometimes. But it was when there was like, I don't love it, but it's not terrible, but it doesn't, you know, but then the one that they came up with, I'm like, yeah, that's it. That's more the look. So Janine, with yours, I mean, I love how you've got the Route 66, you got the car, you got the whole idea of there's the landscape. So how much of this, was this just what they brought to you? Or were you able to kind of give some direction, or were you just like, this is it?
Well, I knew that I wanted it to have the iconic Route 66 on the road. You see that a lot of places when you're driving the route. And it's just a really good signifier that this is a Route 66 novel. It's not just, I mean, I'm a big road trip person. I have taken a lot of road trips. Nothing is like Route 66. It is a completely different world when you're traveling along there. So I wanted that to be really clear. And then I was also very particular about the car. I knew that it had to be a 55 Chevy Bel Air, and they got one, but this is red. As you can see, it's red. Yeah. And I was like, well, in my book, it's like more of a turquoise color. So I had to go through. I loved it so much that I just went through and changed. Okay, it's red, or changed all the details about it. So hopefully we got all of those. And then the other funny thing was, when I was writing this story, I have two really prominent couples, one in 1956, one in modern day. And in 1956, I based my hero physically off of Paul Newman. And so I made that clear. I mean, I didn't even change his name. His name's Paul in the book, because I was like, I just can't. I'm just going to keep it that. But when you look at it, I'll try to show the camera, but it's probably going to go out of focus. When you look, he is basically Paul Newman. Like, they nailed it. So once I saw that, I said, I don't care what else about the cover. The fact that you nailed that detail, I'm in. So yeah.
I love that. It's just fun because it's one of those that everybody sees the cover, but that peeling back the curtain to how do you get to the cover is just different for every book. And so I know that readers are just always curious, but each of your books are so different, and they're in different genres and things like that, but they all require, I know each of you, I know you well, you each do a massive amount of research. You don't just go, oh, I'm going to Vienna with my characters, let's just write like I've been to Vienna. I mean, I know you, Janyre, I read somewhere that, probably on Instagram or something, that you were listening to music of like the Burma mountains when you were writing. I mean, that is immersing yourself in the setting. So what's one of the things that you researched as you were writing the book that you were like, man, I would love to include this, but it would just take it too far. This book would now be 200,000 words instead of, the 85, 90,000, 100. And Janyre can tell you, my books tend to come in on the heavy side anyway, even when I'm trying to hit my word count. So imagine if I put all my research in there, what they would look like. So Janine, do you want to go first on this one?
Yeah. So for me, part of my draw to Route 66 was its role that it played in the Great Depression, and all the people from the Great Plains states, mostly Oklahoma and Arkansas, but also Kansas and Texas, how they took that to California, where they were promised a better life and jobs and all that. And we see that in Grapes of Wrath is the best example, although Kristen Hanna also had The Four Winds, which is a great book that also kind of deals with it. And I had a love-hate relationship with Grapes of Wrath going back since high school. Finally, I basically, to shorten it up, I failed that test in high school and hated it. I hated the book forever, and then decided I'm going to give it another shot now that I'm older, have more interest in that era. And so that was what I read while I was doing kind of my research for this. I really wanted to include a ton of that information about the Dust Bowl, about the trail that the families would take. And there just never was a good place for it in the story. I think I have one paragraph where I discuss it. And I think the only thing I was able to say, my heroine said, I don't know which member of the Joad family I would be, but I hope it wasn't Rose of Sharon, because she was so whiny in that book that was all I got to put in. So if I could have, it would have been a much longer book, and I would have included that part of the history of the road.
Yeah. I love that, because I wasn't even aware of that piece. And being from what I call the true Midwest, Nebraska, I'm sorry, but we are not in the Midwest. If you look at the country, we are not in the middle of the country, even though we're in Indiana, Michigan, and Ohio. And so to think of it as being the artery, it makes sense that would be the artery from here to California. So Janyre, what was one of them? Because I know you are so deeply involved in your research. I think you and I both end up with stacks of research. But I mean, you're talking Burma, India, World War II. There's so many different things. I mean, the special forces, all of that. I'm sure there are lots of things you wish you could have included, but what's one?
Yeah, I went on a lot of rabbit trails before I landed on this story, for sure. So there's a lot of detail about what the Ketchen Rangers did and how they operated inside the theater that I could not include that information, because I would lose the character arc.
That darn character arc.
So even though my books are really heavily researched, I'm a very character driven writer. And so if I included all the detail about the battles and the cool stuff that was happening, you just totally lose that arc. So there was a lot of really interesting tactics that happened and movement, even between like what the British were doing and what the Americans were doing, and kind of how they weren't working together so well at points. And the Chinese actually were they were the primary force in Burma, the Chinese. So it was a very interesting setup for war that would have been really fun to explore because I'm a history geek, but everybody else would have been bored to tears. So
you just have to write another one that's set in headquarters where then you can go through all that.
Yes. Well, and things like, the sapphire mines, there's tons of sapphire mines in Burma. We get a lot of our sapphires from Burma, and they were operated by the British. And so there was a lot of interesting political stuff that was happening in the sapphire mines as the Imperial Japan was coming through, and how that was not handled very well.
Susan's going to write another book. Yeah. This time it'll be about sapphires.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah. And there's just a lot of really interesting things that about that area of the world that Americans don't know. So.
Yeah. It's so true. There's so much about that subcontinent and region that we just are clueless about. So Susan, your book went all over the world.
Yes.
So what was something that you were just like, man, I wish I had another 5,000 words?
I would always wish I have another 5,000 words. It's probably good that I don't. But, for me, it was easy to go, the path that they went, and this book was easy. I didn't have to make the path up because they were actually following places that the Empress Zita went with her family. So like that part, I just got to go and explore those places, or like I had already been in Vienna. I got to visit Royalston, Massachusetts. I couldn't convince my husband to go overseas to the other places, no matter how hard I tried. But I think for me, I would have loved to incorporate even a little bit more of the history, like this Habsburg family and Empress Zita's like mother and grandmother, Sissy, as they call her, was truly like a crazy lady. She was just insane crazy. She was into how she lived, and she was actually assassinated. And I mean, there's so much interesting. And then to be able, I only got to put a very tiny few sentences in about her. But she was a real character to follow through. And then the history of the he said, she said, with this baron who took the jewels out of Vienna and was supposed to meet up with them later, the emperor and empress. And it's become this, he says he gave them the jewels. They say he didn't give them the jewels. And
where are the jewels?
And where are the jewels? And so to be able to put a few more of those details in would have been really a lot of fun to talk about those characters, but just don't have the word count.
I know. We really need to talk to our publisher about that. We just say, we just need, people will pay for a longer book. I'm sure they will.
I would think so. I mean,
yeah. Mine was 120,000 words. I think I needed to be cut off.
Yeah. I don't know. The Accused is right at 100,000. This next one is like right at 100,000.
It would be so great. But I do think that maybe their teams, like these marketing teams and these editorial teams, maybe know what they're talking about. I don't know. So maybe they're good at trying to teach me brevity.
I know. And all the times I go through it, I'm like chopping and chopping and chopping. But then the problem is I'm adding as I'm chopping. And so And I usually end up adding more than I chop, so it doesn't work very well. But yeah, it's so fun. And I spent so much of last year embedded in art fraud and art forgery and art theft, and it was so much fun. And like, I could write 3 more books just on that, which who knows, maybe someday I will. But that's half the fun of the writing is the research, I think. But I know not everybody feels that way. So last question that I thought would be really fun, because each of you write very different genres. I mean, we all do. And as I was thinking about it, I was like, there's kind of 2 ways to look at it. Either we like intentionally choose our genre. Like when I was making the move into legal suspense, I very intentionally had been placing legal characters either as a hero or heroine or someone in their family books before I actually had what you would call a legal suspense, so that it was, even if it was a World War II, there was a strong legal character somewhere in the book. So it was like a half step instead of this full genre hop. And then there are others where we just fall into them. Like we didn't know we were going there. And then all of a sudden we're writing World War II. Oh, I wonder how that happened. And so I just wondered with y'all, because I've been on both sides where I've intentionally chosen it, or I found myself writing and loving writing, you know, like 12 World War II books. Which way did it happen for y'all? So Janyre, I thought we'd start with you. You're very intentional and deliberate. So I'm going to guess you chose your genre, but maybe I'm wrong.
I kind of feel like that World War II chose me. So I didn't like history growing up.
Wow.
I hated history. I thought it was boring and I hated memorizing and I could not remember dates if my life depended on it. And that is how history is taught in, you know, the public school system. And I actually didn't go through a public school system, any school system that you encounter. And then I went to college, and my US history professor, one of the very first assignments he ever gave us was to go talk to a relative about the Depression, World War II, or World War II. And so we were supposed to go talk to a friend or family member, and my grandparents lived not very far from me. And I was very close with my grandparents. And so I just went up and talked to my grandparents, and they told me stories that I had never heard before. And I just was absolutely fascinated. And from that point on, I called my grandma and I would talk to her a couple times a month and just ask her questions about her history and what her life was like. And so the story just kind of fell in my lap that way. The interest fell in my lap.
Yeah.
And then the Vietnam era stuff, that was more a choice. Because World War II is getting to be a little bit more difficult to break into and find your place in that era. And so I wanted to do something that would have similar notes to it, but wouldn't be World War II. And so I then started writing Vietnam, and then my World War II books got picked up. So it's kind of been an interesting journey that we were talking before. Just keep taking moves forward. You just keep stepping forward, and you keep going in the direction that it just seems to be going until God tells you different, and then you pivot and you make that turn and you do the next. So yeah, in some ways World War II picked me, but then I chose Vietnam on purpose.
I love that. And I think that's so great. And it really is great advice of, you know, you just keep moving and you keep doing until you hear that voice saying, nope, go this way. Yep. So Susan, how about you?
So I think for me, romance has just always been what I gravitate towards, and how I see the world, how I see God's story. I tell everyone, I'm like, God is the greatest romancer of all. So romance has always been what flows out when I try to write. I don't think I could write a story without a romantic thread in it, unless God surprises me one day. So, but I think my romances have evolved, and some of that has been choices on my part of just wanting to stretch myself into more of just a 50-50 split, because I always have loved history. I love mystery. I love the idea of chasing after things. So I think I started with one of my books a while ago, just adding a little bit more plot driven than like that good balance of, I love characters, but what can I do to deepen the plot and have more steps to the plot? And that is kind of where when I started brainstorming this story, the fun of getting to take it beyond just a guy and a girl and throwing in more characters and friendships and depth and history, and expanding that world became a lot of fun for me. And I think I did that on purpose, partly as just the writer in me wanting to stretch some new muscle I hadn't tried before, but also the reader in me looking for a little something more too. And so, yeah, I think it was a mixture of both.
I love that. And I know as a reader, I'm always, romance is great, but I always want a little something more going on too. And as a writer, you know, the more books I write, the more I'm always like, okay, so how can I challenge myself next? How can I grow? And so I love that that's part of what's leading you in the direction you're going. So Janine, how about you? A lot of your books, they're all contemporary. They all have some type of romance-ish. But beyond that, kind of how do you see it? Because it's kind of women's fiction, sort of. So how did you find your genre, or how did it find you?
So I write completely based off of like my emotions and my feelings. I don't think every other writer is like that. I think a lot of them have more logic part, you know, as part of it. And I really chase a feeling with the books that I write. So with my first series of books, I wanted to put on paper the feeling that I get when I go out to the Madison River in Montana, and this rustic, romantic type feeling. The idea of falling in love out there. I'm much like Susan, where if a story doesn't have romance in it, I can't get into it. I can't. And I will find the tiny bit. I remember watching The Bells of St. Mary's, and the whole time I'm like, so when are they going to get together? It was like a nun and a priest, I think, right? I don't remember. They never get together, and I'm like, because I mean, I have that desire to see that happen. I don't know why. I don't know if it's the classes I teach in my day job. I just love seeing those relationships. And as far as the women's fiction part of it, I have tried writing funny because I love reading rom-coms. Angela Strong and Bethany Turner and Jessica Kate. I think they do such a good job. But I just can't get away from those heavy elements of life and the things that really make you ask questions towards God, towards yourself. And that I wanted to combine my love of romance and these amazing settings like Route 66 or Montana. And then also this desire to touch a subject where people who are reading, who are going through that, wouldn't feel alone. That's basically the gist of it. And as far as contemporary, I would love to write more historical, but I am scared of research. So maybe if Janyre or you, Kara, can teach me about it, maybe I'll write more historical.
I will do your research for you, girl. I love research.
She'll just feed you the details you need when you need them. But I love that because there's such intention, you know, like I'm very much like historical. I'm like 1935 to 1948 is probably my time period because in part the research, I'm like, I know that time period. And so I have the feel for it. I have the vibe for it. But even like contemporary and legal suspense, I don't think people understand, even as an attorney, how much research goes into writing those books and keeping them authentic. Because I'm like, even if I did, you know, kind of cheated a little bit, someone would call me on it. Someone would totally call me on it. So,
I think contemporary is harder. I do.
Yeah.
Because like even writing the Vietnam era, it's living memory. And so like I can write something slightly wrong in, you know, World War II Burma because there's been like 3 people that were there that can use English. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And yet if you're writing in the US, especially in the contemporary time period or in living memory, if you make a mistake, there's, you know, 2.3 billion people that are going to be like, excuse me. So
exactly. You didn't do your research.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Yeah. So this has been so much fun. Thank you for hopping on tonight with me, because this was relatively spontaneous, which I love. But where can readers find you? So Janine, where can people find your books? And like, you give the world's best pre-order
She does.
specials. Oh my word. Like, you sent me like personalized stationery. I'm like, did you do that for everybody? Because that's insane. But
I
where
did.
can they find you? Yeah, that's
Well,
crazy, girl.
I have to say, I did that because in my prior books, I never knew who pre-ordered my books, and I wanted to
Yeah.
see each person. And so that was part of the reasoning behind that. So like when you pre-ordered my book, I was like, yeah, so that's why I did
That's
that.
a smart strategy.
So you can always go to my website, but I don't think anybody actually goes to my website. So instead, find me on Facebook. I have the Reader Grove with Janine Rosche, and I also have Instagram, and that's really about it. But yeah, find me there. You can find my books. I like to say anywhere books are sold, but you might have to actually ask for them. Ask them to order it for you, or you can find it Baker Bookhouse, Life in Newton, Kansas.
Faith and Life.
Faith and Life. I was like Life and Faith. That's not it. You can find it there as well as Amazon and all those.
Awesome. Janyre, where can people find you?
I jokingly say, if you can spell my name, you can find me.
Yeah.
Good luck.
It'll be in the show notes, y'all. It'll be in the show notes.
So Janyre Tromp is my handle everywhere. So I am mostly hang out on Instagram and Facebook. I'm on Twitter a lot. If you're a writer, I do a lot of writer tips on Twitter and LinkedIn. And then you can sign up for, it's Books in Beautiful Ugly journal, and you can sign up for that and you get a free novella. It's Vietnam era.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
So you can get a free novella there if you want to sign up for the journal. I send it out about once a month. And I love hanging out with readers. I love talking about books and crazy stuff. And the Beautiful Ugly is just kind of an acknowledgement that a lot of times the things that I look for beauty even when it isn't pretty, because life isn't pretty. But it's still beautiful, and we can find those places without being weirdly Pollyanna and #blessed. So I love it. And Susan, where can people find you?
Pretty much the same thing. I mainly hang out at Instagram and Facebook. The big thing is to use my middle initial, Susan L. Tuttle, because there are other Susan Tuttles out in the world, some who have published books as well. So you got to put that middle initial in there. In both those places, you can find ways to sign up for my newsletter. I have a prequel novella to the Everleigh story as well that comes out when you sign up. And you can find my readers group through there. I have a readers group called Bookie Monsters because I love cookies and I love books. So kind of threw those two together. And same thing, books, wherever books are sold, you're going to find it. So, and I love hearing from readers, talking to them. It's just, I love engaging with it. I always say it's the funniest thing because I am truly an introvert. I'm actually quite shy, but I love to talk to people about Jesus and about books, and the encouragement is just, I think anytime you tap on those subjects, we can talk for hours. So
yeah, I love it. That's great. And I think when you sign up for all of our newsletters, you do get a free book or novella. And those aren't just chapters, y'all. Those are like full 20,000 words or more type of book. So it's definitely worth signing up. And it's a great way that you can test someone's writing before you invest in a book. And don't forget to leave reviews and ask for your library to purchase our books too, because those are great ways, number one, to help us find new readers by asking for your library to carry our books. But then reviews really do help other people to find us as well. Well, thank you all so much for joining me tonight. This was so much fun. It's always a blast to get together with y'all. So thanks for carving out time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kara.
Kara.